getting started with material design. I'm James Williams. I'm a senior content developer at Udacity. And a little bit about me, I wrote a book on HTML5 game programming that's really, really old, so you shouldn't buy it because I only get like $1 from it anyway. I create Android and web courses at Udacity, and on the weekends I do Spartan races, and I got this job by accidentally crashing a party. And here's just my shameless plug. Take our courses at Udacity. We have a bunch of courses that are available for free. And my internet is weird, so just assume that that's a page loading. But we have a bunch of courses that are available for free on Android development, web development, and then we also have some other courses on iOS development that we didn't do with Google. So go and do that stuff. So the target audience for this talk is a person who has developed an Android app, though this isn't very code heavy, but it kind of uses some terminology from that, understands general Android layouts, and contains enough design to get you moving. That's my Wi-Fi coming on. Sorry about that. Okay, come on. Okay, are you done? Or what else? Okay. All right. So just a quick show of hands. How many of you guys have developed an Android app before? Cool. Oh, and some of you kids have too. Sweet. For you guys, we also have a Android for Beginners course that we just launched a couple months ago, so go check that out. How many designers in the room? Great. So no one can correct me if I'm wrong. So what I'm going to talk about is obviously material design, and then go over the different components of material design, surfaces, bold graphic design, meaningful motion, and adaptive design. Now those last two, because they build a lot on the APIs that came before material design, before Android Lollipop, that'll be kind of a shorter summary of those. So what is material design? Material design is a design language from Google that combines elements of print design, motion design, digital paper, light and shadow to make cross-platform apps. It is a set of guidelines, so you'll hear a caveat from me a lot in this talk that this is what you should do, but if you need to do something else that better fits your app, then go and do it. So why should you use it in your apps? You should use it because users yell at you if you don't. They will post nasty messages on your Google Play reviews and says this app is not material and all that stuff, so use it. So here's a link to the spec and the general design site from Google. So the first thing we're going to talk about is surfaces. So surfaces are 1 dip thick. Raise your hands. Do people know what a dip is here? Yes, no. Okay, so a dip is a, so a long, long time ago, there was this phone, the T-Mobile G1. Which was introduced back in 2008, I believe. And the screen, this phone looks really, really bad. The density on it, it's 160 dots per inch. So a dip is a physical pixel on that screen phone. So that's where dips come from. Okay. And go back to this guy. So anyway. So they're 1 dip thick. They exist in 3D space because they're a digital sheet of paper. They can cast shadows on one another and be moved with changes in elevation. They can also be combined or split apart. And here is a little visualizer demo. Is my Wi-Fi on? Please be on. Okay, it is not. I'm gonna switch to the BlueStacks, and sorry about this. Wi-Fi kind of happens. Switch back. Okay, let's see if that works now. Okay, so here we have, stop jumping in front. All right, move that down there. All right, so we have a material, kind of a sample material app. This would be what shows up in Android Studio if you just create a blank app. So it has a little button down here, a title bar, and you can see how this is several surfaces. The menu bar here is its own surface. This background is a surface, and this button here is a surface. Go back to the slides. Okay. All right. Do that. All right, cool. All right, something that you shouldn't do, you shouldn't just automatically create your own elevations. The design spec is very specific on what heights things should have. So go to that link there, and it will show you the heights of everything on your screen. And it's kind of a long list of things, and I'm gonna skip that. All right, so one of the things that showed up there was a floating action bar. Floating action bar should serve as a primary action for your app. It's not needed for every single app. If you don't have something that your user's doing 80% of the time, you shouldn't have a floating action bar, and there should be at most one. Floating action bars come in two different sizes, 56 dips and 40 dips. 56 dips is the size that you should use generally. You can use the 40 dip size if the requirements of your app kind of allow it. If it just looks weird to have a 56 dip floating action button. And the strings for those are normal and mini. So to add a floating action button to your app, you'll need to add this code to your Gradle file. And you'll notice here that it says 22.2.0. That is for the build tools of when I made this app. Right now, I think it's 24.4.4. So use whatever is the latest and greatest for your app. So next thing you'll need to do is add a bit of code, XML code for the floating action button. And we can see here at the top where it says app fab size equals normal. That's saying that it's going to be a 56 dip floating action button. It's going to have an elevation of 6 dips. And when you press it, it's going to elevate to 12 dips. And then another thing you'll need to do is the fab requires you to have the theme derived from AppCompat. So if you start up a normal app in Android Studio, usually it'll give you the top, which is material. You really shouldn't use material because it's not backward or forward compatible. Use the one on the bottom. So if you have a material light theme, you can just change it to theme.appcompat.light. Give me a second. So coordinator layout is a new layout in material design that allows you to kind of control how different elements interact and move around the screen. So here is an example of a coordinator layout. And let me go widescreen on this so you can see it a little bit better. So the coordinator layout is our outermost layout. And then we have an app bar layout inside of that. That app bar layout kit contain a collapsing toolbar, which would be a collapsing toolbar layout or something like that. You have your general recycler view, the replacement for list view, of course, and then your floating action button down here. And I can give you a link for this at the end. One of the instructors that I did the course with, Roman Nurek, created this visualizer. Go back to my slides. All right. Oh, and I forgot I had a demo, but my Android Studio did not reload. Just give me a second. All right, so while I'm waiting for that to load, I'm going to talk about snack bar. Now, snack bars are like a coordinator layout friendly toast message. So your toast message kind of shows up semi-transparent over top of your app, and it just doesn't give you context. It doesn't give you anything to like act upon for your app. Snack bars can contain an action, so if you delete a message and you're like, oh man, I didn't mean to delete that, you can have a undo action and click that. They can also be dismissed, and it will move the fab out of place vertically if there is one, because the resting position of the fab and the snack bar are at the same elevation. Let me see if my Android Studio has started up. And Motion. And okay. Open recent and apologize for this dead time, guys. We had some technical difficulties, so I had to reboot my computer. Coordinator demo, no, it's gonna say, guess that works. And I gotta launch this. All right. Here. All right, let's move on for a little bit and wait for that to come up. All right, so the way that you make a snack bar is similar to a toast message. You have your before this, you will have done a get view by ID for your snack bar, or if you're using butter knife or something like that somehow to get the widget for your snack bar, and you call make with your message and then the duration of how long you want it to show, and then show. If you want to add an action to that, you would add the function call to set action with an on-click listener and a color for that text to show up. And let's see if we're loaded. Yeah, we're cool. We're loaded. All right. So, so this is what I was talking about with coordinator layout, where we have a view with an expanded app bar here, and we have a recycler view of elements. And coordinator layout automatically knows to scroll up and compress that collapse bar view for us. We don't really have to do all that much, but to say this is what the expanded size should be, this is what the compressed size should be, and it knows when to scroll either just the list or the list and the app bar. Any questions before I move on? All right, cool. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is bold graphic design. This is the part of the material design spec that comes from great print design. So the first thing is the Gestalt laws of grouping, and this is kind of a trick from your brain for how you perceive the world. So for instance, in this room, I can see that there are a bunch of kids on the side, a bunch of young adults. So I might assume that they are related, that they're from the same school because they're wearing the same thing. And that's kind of what the Gestalt laws of grouping do based off of proximity or similarity. Your mind kind of makes assumptions on how things are and tries to bring order to a chaotic world. So for a quick example, we have two views up here. The one on the far right is it looks like it's a bunch of avatar type images, circular images with rectangles next to it. Just as I was mentioning before, because all of the circular images are similar, it would be easy to assume that those are the same type of image. Those might be an avatar for a person. and the rectangles are equally similar, they're probably a description for a person. And because the rectangular ones are close to the avatars, they're probably related. They're probably describing the avatar. There's a lot more than that, but that's all I wanted to give you so I didn't bore you. So getting back to some kind of nuts and bolts stuff, in material design, the layouts are laid out with an 8-dip grid and a 4-dip grid for text. And there are a bunch of key lines that allow you to line up things. So you can't see it very much in here, but for this mobile screen, it expects it to be 16 dips from the left edge. And then there's a 72 dip if you're using like avatars or something like that. It helps you line up things. So another thing that you should be using in your design is great use of color. Color provides cohesion across screens. It makes us kind of feel things. So in certain countries, certain colors are not as good. And it's kind of the same in the US, where if you see a red, you might think to stop. You might see a green, you might think to go. It's other things that like that kind of tie into the psychology of your culture and you as a person. So you should think about your colors very, a lot. So what if you're bad at picking colors? So there are 2 sites that you can go and pick colors. One is Material Palette, where it allows you to, if this will load, you can easily select a color palette by selecting 2 colors that will show up when they do. Okay, and there they are. All right, so I could pick a indigo and a purple. And basically what it does is it applies an algorithm to, to say this is what your primary color is going to be, and the color for your dark primary color and light primary color, and then also for your accent color. The other site is Adobe Color, and I have the wrong thing there, but so Adobe Color is a website where it allows you, it has a giant color wheel, and you can pick one color and it kind of show you what the complementary colors or contrasting colors and stuff like that is, so use that. So if you're not moved by that and you're still bad, find a designer, buy them a notebook. They really like notebooks and hipster stuff like that. So this is kind of what Material Palette was doing with picking the colors. So material design, your colors range from a 50 value, which is the very lightest in that, that tint, all the way down to a 900, the darkest. You should select a 500 for your primary color, and then bump up a couple of steps to a 700 for your status bars, down to 300 for your secondary bars. And then each color also has an accent range from A100 to A700. Generally, an A200 will work well. So this is that same palette that we selected for Material Palette. And one of the other things that I forgot to mention about Material Palette is that it allows you to download your colors for the web and for Android. You can download it in XML format to just drop into your apps. All right, so typography, a couple of definitions. A font or a typeface is a specific style of writing a set of text or characters. A font family is a group that are equally influenced by that same style, but they might have slight differences here and there. And a font weight is basically the thickness of a font, and the style is generally whether it's italic or normal. And I will skip that for a second. So here's kind of an example of everything that lives in Roboto. So all of them have the general design characteristics of Roboto, but you can see that there is a regular version, there's a condensed, a monospace, and a slab font. It also has different weights from the thin all the way down to the black, and then bold and italic. So you can set a different font in your app by using the code up top if you have a text view or anything that derives from a text view, and add the font families of the different sans serifs and the text style. And you'll notice that there is a bold style down there. Generally, you don't want to use bold just because it kind of programmatically makes bold for you, as opposed to a font that was specifically made for that. And you can also use a custom font in your app by using this code here. I have a TrueType font that I downloaded into my assets directory, and then I create the asset. And then for the text view, I'm just setting the typeface. One thing to keep in mind is that on attach, you need to do things in unattached, because if you do it in onCreate, because of the fragment lifecycle, there's a small time after you create a fragment before it's attached to an activity. So getActivity.getAssets will result in an error and crash your app. And these are all the different sizes that are preset in Android, from display 4 all the way down to button. And you can, there's a flash flood warning for people on TV. So these are all the different types that you can use. So it kind of shows you that you can still use one set font and have it be very different and very engaging. So to the far right, that is the same UI, but using the same font sizes. And as it comes closer to me, it uses different font weights and different font styles, and like the header is using a slap font and different colors and stuff like that. So you can stay with you can stay within Roboto and not worry about it. So my pro tips for Android typography is never use dips for font sizes. You always use SP, which is scale-independent pixels, which allows your font to be resized if the user has a large or setting or small setting. Yeah. Yeah.
The grid is in dips, but the font size is in SP.
Yes. Okay. That question was, the grid is in dips, but the fonts are in SP. Yes. The grid that you're using the grid for alignment, but the font itself is going to be in SP. And there is like this weird conversion of how to convert SP to dips. It's in the course, and it's really weird, but yeah. I was freaked out by that too, so it's no big deal. You can use Roboto for all the things in your app, and all fonts are not created equal. Just because you have a really font that you think is really awesome, it might not scale down very well, or the creator of the font might have not made many weights of it. So just bear in mind that. So just quickly on imagery, I generally try to think of it by asking myself a couple of questions. Is the brand or product I'm designing for serious? Is it playful? Is it stylish? Depending on the answer to those questions is going to determine what types of imagery I'm going to use. And for a specific concept, does imagery easily relate? Like is it something very abstract like syncing, where a illustration will work better than an actual like picture of a person standing at a computer? And who is your intended user or market? And these are things to think about with fonts as well. So if you're making a performance app, a performance profiler app, you wouldn't want to use a cursive font, because that doesn't seem very serious. It doesn't seem fast to your users. Any questions on that before I move on? Cool. All right. So motion. Motion should be instructive and guide your users through your app. This is not the time to say, look at all this cool stuff that I can have whiz around the screen. So it shouldn't distract them, confuse them, and it should be generally orderly. And this goes back into the things about Gestalt where we want to bring order to the chaos. And you don't want to freak out your users by having all of these elements coming in from all different sizes. So Transition Manager was introduced in KitKat 4.4. It allows creation of transition in code or XML, and it does an insane amount of the heavy lifting for you. Have any of you guys ever had to wire up an animation by yourself in Android? Okay, so you guys know my pain of using like the old way in object animator and property animators and stuff like that. So here's kind of an example that I did that only took a couple lines of code. And basically when you click the button, it shuffles the image off of the screen. So that actually is doing a lot of stuff there. So the first thing it's doing is capturing the start state of all the views, then capturing the end state. And it's creating an animator to interpolate between the two. And then based off of what type of transition type I set, it's going to say, okay, using those values, let me make this animation. So this is the code that I use to do that. So I have a slide transition, and I set the slide edge to the top of the screen, so it's going to slide things off the top of the screen. And then down here in Transition Manager, I tell it to begin a delayed transition, and it's using that slide, and then I do all of the things that I'm going to do to the view. In this case, it's just telling the image to disappear. So instead of just fading off the screen, it's going to use that slide and slide off the top. There are a bunch of transition types that were introduced in API 19 and API 21. I showed you slide. By default, if you don't set a transition, it's going to use auto transition, which will use a combination of like sliding and I think exploding and fading and stuff like that. It kind of has a set of things that it will kind of automatically move the things off the screen. Activity transitions. When you're moving between activity, this is another place where you can have instructive motion to guide your user by having a specific transition when they go into or out of a specific activity. So if you have activity A and activity B, when you go from A to B, B's enter activity transition is going to be called, and when you return from B to A, well, A's exit. Restart. So if I have activity A and activity B, when I'm going from A to B, A's exit transition is going to fire, and B's enter activity transition is going to fire. And then when I'm returning from B to A, B's return and then A's re-enter is going to fire.
It sounds like there's a lot of combinations there. And you have this jarring effect if you have a bad exit followed by a different enter.
Okay. Okay, the question was, it seems like it could be really jarring if there are transitions on both sides and if you have a bad exit or a weird enter. The answer is yes, there certainly can be.
You just try to keep them all looking the same, or you just have to do all the possible tests?
The question, re-comment was, do you have to keep them looking the same? There are a couple of things that you can do, like something I'm going to mention in this slide right here, shared element transitions. You can basically say, I want this object or these groups of objects that exist in this view and also exist in this view to transition. So a good way to show it to you is just an example here. So we have, I thought I had it here. It's okay. Coordinated motion. Oh, here it is. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's one for a shared activity, a shared element transition. So I have these sets of avatars, and if I click one of them, it's going to make a transition into the next view. And that one was slightly different because that wasn't an enter or exit. That was just a shared transition. I'm basically saying this set of objects that I have exist in this screen and exist in this next screen. So I want you to figure out how to transition between the two states. So this is another place where it kind of automatically does things for you. So this would be a way where you would avoid having to think of how is A going to transition, how is B going to transition, and just stick to these are the important parts of A that should transition over to B.
Are these fragments or activities?
These are fragments. Yeah. And let me pull up that code for you. Have this code. Repose. Coordinated motion. And here is it. Yep. Question.
Is there a limit of how many transitions you can have in the total program?
Question was, is there a limit of total transitions you can have? No, there is not, but you should try to do as few as possible. Like, you should try to do just enough to kind of move things along, just because one of the things you'll notice if you have a person who has a really old phone, it might lag on their phone if you have like 15 transitions firing off. Good question. Thanks for asking that. Okay. And okay. So here's this code right here that kind of controls it. You have a shared element enter transition, and this one only set. I'm posing. But anyway, so there's a shared element enter transition. It only sets the enter transition in this example. And it just has a simple Boolean check of should it move on a curve or should it just be a straight motion back. And that's another thing that I didn't mention before. You should try to move things on curves as much as possible. All right, going back to slides, did that. Quickly on interpolators, this also goes with transitions. You can parametrically code how you want something to move. And there are a bunch that exist in Android. These are kind of the three that you should probably use at the most. And you can kind of notice, like, if you have a long duration of 300 milliseconds, it makes your app look like it's slow. But if you have something like 300, it looks zippy and fast. So generally, you should try and keep your transitions to be about 300 milliseconds, give or take, and kind of adjust from there to see how it feels. And quickly on adaptive design, how much time do we have? Oh, we're good. So you should think about your content first and not your device. You shouldn't, and what I mean by that is you shouldn't code for a specific device and instead let the content tell you where things should break up. If you have limited developer resources, having a breakpoint at 600 dips is a good starting point, but there are many, many others that you can have. So in the material design spec, there's one for very small screens. It says, let me see if I can blow this up. Nope, doesn't work, image. So there's like 480, 600. There are a bunch of different sizes. So a good starting point is start with 600, and then depending on your user base and whatever form factors you want to support, do more or less. There are a couple different strategies for managing space. So when you're moving from a smaller screen to a bigger screen, you can reveal more of the content that you were showing on the smaller screen. So you might do a master detail view where you show multiple fragments on the screen. You can also reflow the content to just use more of the screen. Or if neither of those work, you can just kind of expand the white space around your content. And dividing is the opposite of revealing, just splitting your UI into multiple fragments. So to implement your breakpoints, you should be using your qualifiers like landscape and portrait, and the ones at the bottom are for specific densities. You should not use the small, medium, large qualifiers because those are really fuzzy and cause problems. And that was it as far as the content that I have, but definitely open for questions. So